Hi guys, welcome to the other part of this video course about vertical preparation with the Tomorrow Tooth approach. On this part of this video I want to cover something that it is post, because you know that the leading phenomenon is about using fiber post, is about using adhesion. If you use adhesion, if you use fiber post, you are modern dentist. But the problem is that they did modern dentistry for a lot of time, and this is not the best thing, because there are a lot of things that doesn't work in bonding fiber post in dentistry. And there are things related to biology and things related to biomechanics. So today I want to discuss about this topic, because a lot of people did this question to me when we do courses and congresses, and I want to share and clarify everything about this. So let's see what happens with post, because we have to decide if we have to fight with a bamboo or if we have to fight like a real man with a sword made of steel. Okay, the first point is okay, we have to put a post, but when we have to put a post? Because if we put a post when there is no need of post, because this is something that you see many times in dental literature, fiber post will always be successful. Okay, so we have just to highlight something about how it works. About how it works, we have to understand that the main factor is the interaxial dentin. The main structural factor is the interaxial dentin. When we lose interaxial dentin, there is something on this topic in the video about the pillars of long-term dentistry. On that video, if you look again, if you need, there is an analysis of the biomechanics between the structural factors of a tooth. And you will understand that the marginal ridges, for example, are less important than conventionally people think. And dentin, the interaxial dentin, is the most important structural factor. When we lose structural factor, and interaxial dentin is the main one, the cusp separated by the loss of tooth structure starts to bend, and we have the accumulation of fatigue that with the time will lead to a crack, and after a while will lead to a fracture. So if we compare the two to a vaulted arch, we can say that the most important parts are the interaxial dentin and the pericervical dentin. Why the pericervical dentin? The pericervical dentin because for the principle found already by Galileo Galilei in the 16th century, when we have a force applied to a vaulted arch, we have two vectors, so not just one vector coming down in a vertical way, but we have also horizontal vectors. And if we compare a tooth to a vaulted arch, you see that the force, the horizontal one, is loaded on that part that it is the pericervical dentin. This, we put the force this, and a part of the load is loaded with the horizontal vector. Of course, if we lose some interaxial dentin, more load will be charged on the horizontal one, so that the strength, the force applied to the horizontal vector is more. So we need a bigger thickness of residual pericervical dentin in order to withstand these forces. Of course, of paramount importance is always the load, okay? Because we can have a weak tooth, but of course, if the load is not enough, deformation will be negligible. The usual example of this golden stone, we can say, the balance is not a good one, but if nobody push, nothing will happen. So of course, without occlusal forces, even the worst dental scenario will work. The problem is that sometimes we are lucky, and you have patients with an easy scenario, okay, like forces, vertical vectors, but sometimes and many times we can't. So we have to understand where we can push a little bit things and when we have to be more aware of what is happening. This is the reason because sometimes what we do, in order to reduce the bending, we do crowns, that it is the aim of this course, how to do crown. Because doing crown, we do a circular reinforcement of the tooth and we reduce the bending. This is something that we have already covered. So this is what we do. The tooth risk to fracture, but putting a ferrule, that in our case is the crown, we go and we reinforce the situation. But what is the problem? The problem is that when we do a crown, the crown reinforces the residual dentinal structure, putting a more compressive force, not absolutely, more compressive force on the residual dentinal structure. So the crown is going, we can say, simplifying, is going to reinforce the residual dentin. But of course, if we drill a lot, drill too much our tooth, like a big shoulder, a big horizontal preparation, the crown won't be enough in order to save this tooth. Because the force will be so much that the crown won't be enough. Okay? So, what we have to do? The example of the bench. If we bend too much, at the end we have the fracture. Because the problem is that even if in the first time the crown of course will stiffen a little bit, if the residual dentinal core is not enough, it will perform better than without the crown, but for a limited amount of time. Because with time, if the bending is still enough, you will accumulate, the dentin will accumulate fatigue, will accumulate cracks, and after a certain amount of time, with the amount of fatigue, the tooth will reach its ultimate strength point and we will start a phase of deformation leading to a fracture. Okay, this is the Wöhler diagram. The Wöhler diagram is very interesting about the understanding of fatigue. The Wöhler diagram expresses the fatigue of a material because with fatigue, even small forces and small deformation, if applied many times, can lead to fracture. So it's not enough to stiffen the complex, but we have to stiffen the complex so that fatigue cannot arise over time. This is the reason because we have to be very careful when we drill our teeth for doing a crown. So, what happened? We go to this part, doing a shoulder, to this part, that the bending is a little bit more, and more fatigue is loaded on the pericervical dentin. And we have the risk that doing this, if you are not careful, we have the formation of a crack. And also horizontal prep, because of the shape, not only reduce pericervical dentin, but also create a snap point prone to crack initiation. More structure, less bending, less fracture. Minimal endodontic, pure vertical preparation is the best way. The problem is that the take-home message is to do small endodontic access, to do vertical preparation as minimal as possible in consideration of your goal. But when you are, let's say, you are retreating a case, you are not able to choose because somebody before you already did it, how to manage these cases. At this point, we start to use post. This is a case of mine. 2 posts, fiber post, perfectly isolated, failed after 4 or 5 years. So my question is if fiber post and adhesion is the past or the future of this kind of restoration, of this build-up restoration, because there is the belief that the use of Faber-Post is the best way that we have. And there are some thinking, some reasoning about this. Let's read these things. According to two in vitro first-line studies, the physical strength of fiber-reinforced post is significantly weaker than that of cast metal post in cores. The highly rigid metal would transfer, this is the reasoning, would transfer lateral forces without distortion to the less rigid dentin and lead to a higher chance of root fracture. The modulus of fiber-reinforced post instead decrease the incidence of the root fracture. In the event of failure, when restored with fiber post, teeth are more likely to be restorable. This is an article about the review of the management of endodontically treated teeth. So this is the reasoning. We have to use fiber post because they perform better. And if they don't perform better and you have some failure, it's a good thing because you are still able to do the restoration, to save the tooth, and this is not true. Instead, the use of metal post is not good because they fracture crowns. But the strange thing is that if we look at follow-up cases, let's look at this article. Dentin-like versus rigid endodontic post at 11 years. Randomized controlled pilot trial on no wall to two wall defect, so teeth with a good compromission. And we look at the same sample, 45 glass fiber post and 46 titanium post. After 11 years, excluding endodontic and periodontal reasons, so things related to the post and its biomechanical drawbacks, for the glass fiber we have 4 root fractures, 1 core fracture and 1 tooth fracture. We have 6 failures on 45 teeth. On titanium post we have just 1 root fractures, 1 versus 6. 1 versus 6 is totally different numbers. Another one. 802 cast post on 565 patients with recall up to 10 years. Success close to 90%, okay? And in this case, these were severe cases with no walls, okay? No walls. And we have 90% at 10 years. Survival time of cast post and course at 10-year retrospective studies. And moreover, this 90% is even more. Because if you look at this table, what do we see? We see that the main failure that they had was at the first year, look, 1 loss of retention, first year and second year. The main problem that they have is loss of retention post 14.4 and 13.3 in the first and second year. Loss of retention happens when we are dealing with a loose post. So, if we don't consider this, because this is related to some technical problems, but if we consider a state-of-the-art cast post, look at the numbers that we have. Almost 0 post-fracture. And if we look at root fractures, look the real number at 10 years, but we are talking about teeth with no walls at 10 years. So, on 800 cases, we have just 8 longitudinal fractures, 6 transverse root fractures on 800 cast posts. So, even considering this, and we are not considering how much drilling has been made on these roots, because this is a game changer, but even in this way, at 10 years on heavily compromised teeth, we have 14 cases on 800. Instead of the other cases with fiber post, we have 6 failures on 45 teeth with 2 walls. Numbers are completely different. Do metal post retained restorations result in more root fractures than fiber post retained restorations? A systematic review and meta-analysis. And even here we see that fiber posts perform in a worse way than rigid post. And here also we understand something. Here is the examination of the stress between fiber post and composite core, and between metal post and the core. And what do we see? We see that when we use on the left the fiber post, you see that there is almost no load on the fiber post. But this, what does it mean? That it is true that we apply less force to the roots, but we apply a lot of dentatus and placement of the apply a lot of force on the abutment, especially where we understood that it is the weak point of our teeth, the pericervical dentin, where we put the crown. So what happens? That it is true that we don't stress so much the root, but what was the reason? Because we put a post in the tooth. It was to help the restoration to survive in a better way. Instead, if we look with the metal we see that the pattern is slightly different. There is less stress on the cervical part, that it is the weak part that we want to stiffen, the weak part that where we want to reduce the bending. And there is a load, of course, in the central part of the tooth, in the root. But this is something that we want, because when we put a post, what do? We want to share a part of the problem, of the bending, with the root. So the modulus of Young needed to be evaluated together with the section of the material. Because people speak about this modulus of dentin, but because the section is small, they bend a little more. When you take a fiber post, you are able to bend and break a fiber post. And this should be something enough in order to improve the behavior of the build-up. This is the formula. Cross-sectional area for Young's elastic modulus, fract length of the element. But the problem is that fiber posts are thin in comparison to the thickness that we want. And also they rely on adhesion. And relying on adhesion is a problem, because adhesion is something that suffers from aging over time, especially when there are some mechanical loading. Because what happens with fiber posts that are passively cemented in an adhesive way is that the loading of the adhesion lead to a destruction of the bonding, so that after some years there is no absolutely bonding of the fiber post. And the fiber post is there just because there were inside the root canal some undercuts where some flowball, some resin, some cement arrived, and the fiber post is not able to come out. But physically speaking, there is no adhesion anymore. So what happens with the fiber post? Because they bend together with the restoration, we have a tooth that it is bending, and the fiber post bend together with the tooth, giving zero stiffening of the restoration. This is what happened. The force is applied to the pericervical dentin, and we have the bending, and the bending, we have the fatigue, and we have the accumulation of fatigue, the crack and the fracture. Nothing changed. We just save some time. I don't know, 1 year, 2 years, but the situation does not change in a dramatic way. Because also adhesion is stressed and decreases over time always, and moreover if we load that area. This is a case of mine, horizontal fracture after 5 years of lithium disilicate crowns with the fiber post made in 2006 on the shoulder prep on the lateral incisors. Here, for example, and I realized in my hands that most of the failures are between 4 and 6 years when you use fiber post with teeth, with not so much, with a real biomechanical conformation. And here is the case. You see the fracture? And look, another thing that is very interesting. Where is the fracture? The fracture is where from the horizontal part of the shoulder we go to the straight part, because there is the point where shoulder preparation or horizontal preparation creates a snap point that it is perfect for starting a crack or a fracture. Another case, 2010, a big shoulder. 8 years later, 2018. Another case, 2008. You see, you have to wait 5 years, 10 years, but they are coming back. 2008, look, this wonderful crown preparation with this nice shoulder, perfect soft tissue, veneer on the other teeth, crowns with zirconia on this, cementation. 11 years. 2009, 2008, 2019. After 11 years, I don't know if the lateral or the central has been the first to fail, because they were cemented together. These were joined crowns, splintered crowns, but this is the result. Before, when we dream about our perfect modern adhesive rubber dammed dentistry, and the second, the bad reality of the time. Another one. I did the preparation in 2008, the bonding of the first post on the central, the bonding of the second post, and the fracture of the third post on the canine. Probably not because there is adhesion, but probably just because there are some undercuts that made it impossible to come out for the post. And if adhesion is less reliable from the beginning, like a case like this, look, this case, I did this fiber post. This was one of my last fiber posts, guys. I did this fiber post on this sort of sclerotic dentin, so adhesion was not so good from the beginning, probably. I did the zirconia crown. I was thinking that the space was enough. I did an overlay restoration. On the other premolar, bonding of the lithium disilicate restoration. You see, quite enough enamel on at least 50% of the 50% of the perimeter. Bonding. Final, I did the retreatment, but it was not possible to arrive to the apex. However, patient without symptoms, 1 year. 3 years. And so here I want also to say something about who says that when fiber post fail is not a problem because it's likely that we can do again other work. This is a lie. Because in most of the cases, before the bonding, we have a massive decay. Because what happens? That we have at the microscopic level, we have the bonding with bending. We see just maybe that the crown is moving, but what happens is that beyond the crown, beyond the build-up, below the build-up, some bacteria are able to go in and starts a sort of decay. So when you have a failure of a fiber post, unless you are lucky, in most of the cases you will find a massive decay. So it is not true that when a fiber post fail, in most of the cases you will be able to find a decay. After 6 years, also the overlay restoration, 50% of enamel probably was not enough. So after 6 years, also the overlay fractured, and they did a crown, finally, I can say. The root is still there because the patient is taking some medications and doesn't want to do the extraction. So after a decade, I did fiber post for a decade. I did them also with microscope. I was bonding them perfectly. I got crazy about fiber post, and so after a decade, fiber post have a special place now in my office. Rubbish. No, not rubbish. There is something that to do with fiber post. I found that for the same reason fiber post fail, they are perfect when you are working with the cast post for doing the provisional restoration. I realigned the fiber post with some resin inside the root canal together with the provisional. I will share a case about this at the end of this course, this video course. Because for the same reason, when you have a fiber post aligned with some resin, so flexibility plus flexibility, the final outcome is that you're able with some tendon to bond the rest to cement with temporary cement the restoration, but it's very easy without damaging nothing to remove the provisional with the fiber post. So there is something good about fiber post. This is the end of part 1 of this video course about fiber post, about post. See you in the next part of this video with the part 2. Bye guys.